We are now a few days out from the release of Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, and more people have rolled the credits, but it's very possible that you have not rolled the credits. In fact, you may have not even touched the game. It's possible you don't have any interest in playing Age of Imprisonment, and part of that reason might be because you're feeling slighted from Tears of the Kingdom, but it also might have been because of how you felt about Age of Calamity. And of course what I mean by that is the decision by the Hyrule Warriors team to have Age of Calamity jump the shark. It introduced Teriko, a little robot buddy who fled to Zelda's time from an alternate reality where the Calamity already happened. The story of the Calamity then plays out fairly regularly, with a few exceptions, such as the new characters like Astor, but otherwise things went according to plan, up until the Calamity itself of course. As the divine beasts were invaded by the Ganon blights, and the champions began to lose their battles, the time came for their demise, but instead of dying, they were saved at the last minute by Teriko, who brought the descendants back in time to save their ancestors at the last moment. From there, the descendants and champions worked together to beat back the Calamity and save the day. Thus, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity goes down as an alternate universe retelling of the Calamity, where it is averted entirely, and the events of Breath of the Wild never come to pass. This was a very frustrating thing for many people. Even myself, while I was maybe warmer to the ending than a lot of people, I certainly still felt a degree of frustration. Others have gone as far as to say that they felt betrayed, like Nintendo had lied to them, and they had been falsely advertised to. They were promised a game that told the story of the Calamity, not what they basically considered to be Legend of Zelda fanfiction with a happily ever after story. Some people felt like this was done as a money grab, others felt they were just taking the cowardly way out instead of actually having to show the champions being killed. There are many different interpretations as to why they deviated from the original ending, but regardless of why you feel they went that way, there's no doubt the decision left a lot of people feeling sour. And aside from simply fostering feelings of frustration, it also led to Age of Calamity being almost universally deemed to be not canon. Some of this is out of spite, with many people simply wanting to have washed their hands of something so frustrating by not including it in the timeline. There are other people who argue it could be perfectly canon, simply as yet another timeline branch, one that will probably never be further explored. But to many people, that's basically the same thing as being non-canon. When you look at the Hyrule Warriors franchise then, you have one game that is explicitly non-canon, and another that seems to be canon at first blush, but turns out to be an alternate universe what-if story. So 2 years later, when Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment was announced for the Nintendo Switch 2, a lot of people sort of just collectively rolled their eyes. Another Hyrule Warriors game about a war that ended in tragedy, and surely another chance for them to deviate and offer a happy ending alternative. It seemed obvious to many people that instead of Rauru sacrificing himself to lock Ganondorf in stasis, the champions, or perhaps descendants, once more would go back in time and save the day. Or perhaps this brand new construct character who was never shown in the original game is actually Link and he'll come back to save the day. Or maybe Link in the flesh will come back. There are all manner of arguments. Then a very strange and kind of funny thing started to happen. Nintendo started repeatedly emphasizing that the story was going to be canon. In the actual advertising material, they were referring to it as a canonical tale. It seems as though Nintendo themselves were going out of their way to clarify to people that this was going to be a canon Zelda game, not another alternate universe shenanigan. Many people were not convinced though. It was still a very common sentiment to believe that Nintendo was just lying. After all, these people felt as though they had been lied to about Age of Calamity. Why wouldn't Nintendo lie one more time? It would be very on brand. So the fact that Nintendo was specifically clarifying the canonicity of Age of Imprisonment meant very little to them, especially once brand new characters, such as the mysterious construct and Kalamo the Korok, began to make appearances. It started to feel very clear to these people that these new characters were the means by which the story was going to be altered, and Nintendo was once again simply trying to convince their audience the game was canon as a way to get them to spend money on it before bait and switching them again. And now the game is out, and the question remains, is it canon? If you're simply here to find out whether the same thing happens again, whether Age of Imprisonment jumps into alternate reality and has a secretly happy ending, let me make things easy for you. No, the game does not jump the shark. It does, in fact, remain a mostly faithful retelling of the imprisoning war as laid out in the memories, while significantly fleshing out the moment-to-moment of the war. The new characters introduced are not there to alter the main events. In fact, they primarily exist as a means to resolve a completely separate storyline. Nintendo was not bamboozling you this time. Age of Imprisonment is what they said it would be. There's a lot of time left in this video, and the reason for that is because there are a lot of people who need a little bit more than that. They need some proof outside of simply the game not jumping the shark, and we have a lot of that. We have a number of concrete examples as to why this is definitely a canon game. By the end of this video, if you still try to argue that the game isn't really canon because it's a spin-off or whatever your argument is, I don't think there's much anyone can do for you. That's not saying you have to like Age of Imprisonment and the fact that it's canon, but it does seem pretty irrefutable. From this point on, there will be spoilers. There's your warning. So the first argument I'd offer is the simple idea that the game is canon because it was advertised as such, and the story itself did nothing to contradict that declaration. Nintendo repeatedly advocated that this was a canonical tale, and indeed it did play out straightforwardly, with some new additions to the plot, certainly, such as Calamo and the mysterious construct, but there was very clearly intentional direction to end the story the same way as the memories in Tears of the Kingdom. Calamo and the construct were not mentioned in the memories, and what happens? Calamo turns into a tree that would eventually become the ancient tree stump, forgotten to time, and the mysterious construct is intentionally erased from history to avoid the potential of any in the future discovering the power of the forbidden constructs and trying to rebuild them. Does it feel a little bit contrived in the way that prequels often do? Absolutely. As a Star Wars fan, it's common for me to watch the original trilogy and wonder where the heck any of the secondary source characters are. I bet Luke sure could have used some help from Ahsoka or even 50 Cal Kestis. It's tradition in Star Wars to find some sort of contrived reason to explain the absence of these characters from the movies, and it feels contrived here too, but not contrived enough that it really bothers me. And what it means is that Tears of the Kingdom and Age of Imprisonment are completely compatible. Aside from some really nitpicky stuff, the lore isn't really conflicting at all. There's no massive plot twist, things play out exactly how you think they would. So when Nintendo refers to Age of Imprisonment as a canonical tale, there's no reason to disbelieve that. There are, of course, going to be lots of people who don't really accept this and say, well, it doesn't even really matter if the game itself is canon because it doesn't interact with the rest of the series in any meaningful way, so it is effectively non-canon, which I find a really silly argument in the Zelda series of all things. Does that mean Link's Awakening is non-canon because it doesn't really interact with other games, besides from the occasional Easter egg reuse of Ballad of the Windfish? It's the same argument people use with Age of Calamity, saying that even if the game is canon in an isolated timeline branch, it doesn't really matter since it is so self-isolated. But in this case, that doesn't really ring true for Age of Imprisonment. The events of this game have already been reflected outside of it, in this case via Zelda notes. If you listen to the entry that triggers at the ancient tree stump, it directly references the spear that Calamo used to root himself to the location.
In Hyrule, there are a number of large decaying trees that are likely over 1,000 years old, not unlike this tree stump. There is a legend about this tree in particular that says it was inhabited by a dignitary spirit. I too sense something important from this tree. An archaeological survey will soon take place here, so I cannot wait to hear about their findings. Previous archaeological investigations discovered a single ancient spear within this decaying tree trunk. It has stirred up spirited discussion among many researchers, but little additional information has been revealed, despite their piqued interest.
It's a very direct reference to the specific ending of Age of Imprisonment, and you can listen to it by visiting that location in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So Tears of the Kingdom itself is having interplay with Age of Imprisonment, and Zelda Notes is certainly canon, so clearly the Zelda team is thinking about the events of Age of Imprisonment when they're writing up the new notes. So yes, Age of Imprisonment is interacting with the series outside of its own story. Nevertheless, there are going to be those who say that doesn't really matter either, and the fact is that even if it doesn't conflict with the story of Tears of the Kingdom, and even if the events of the game have been referenced by Zelda Notes, it still doesn't really matter because the game was developed by Koei Tecmo, and even if the Zelda team is being forced to acknowledge it as canon, only the stuff worked on by the Zelda team actually counts. And I mean, that's fair. If we draw a reference to Star Wars again, there are a lot of people who only consider the stuff worked on directly by George Lucas, or with some involvement from him, to be actually canon. But if that was the case, guess what? Age of Imprisonment would also be canon, because as it turned out, a significant portion of the Zelda team actually worked on it. Some 20 plus members of the Zelda team lent their talents to Age of Imprisonment, and this includes Fujibayashi, director of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, who is credited as as the scenario creator for Age of Imprisonment. This was basically a co-collaboration between Koei and Nintendo. There's no arguing that this is simply Koei Tecmo's interpretation of the story. Fujibayashi himself is involved. Aonuma is also listed in the credits, although the level of his influence is extremely vague, and I honestly don't think he was deeply involved aside from probably consultation. But Fujibayashi's involvement seals the deal. This was a collaborative game. So let's look at what we have in support of the idea that the game really is canon here. Nintendo has repeatedly said it was canon in marketing. The story itself went out of its way to adhere to the memories of Tears of the Kingdom, going so far as to wrap up its side stories in a way that remains compliant with the memories. The ending, with Calamo dropping roots where the mysterious construct fell, is directly referenced in Zelda Notes, which is a canon resource. And lastly, a number of people from the Zelda team have directly taken part in the development of Age of Imprisonment, including Fujibayashi, the director of Tears of the Kingdom. The scenarios were being created by the Zelda team. This is a canon Zelda game. And look, I know this video to some of you will seem a little bit extraneous. As far as I think, I abide by its canon because the Zelda team says it is. But there are many people, and you don't have to go far to find them, who adamantly disagree and will do everything in their power to write this game off as non-canon simply because they don't like the direction the story went, they don't like the idea of a spin-off being canon, they simply have a lot of animosity towards Tears of the Kingdom, or any other number of problems. So the least we can do is put together a cohesive list of reasons why they're wrong, and that's what I've done here. And that's everything I've got for you. I hope you're enjoying Age of Imprisonment. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you liked it and want to see more from me, please consider giving me a subscription, and as always, stay safe out there. After all, it's dangerous to go alone.